Welcome. My name is Beri Meric. I'm co-founder and CEO at Ivy. I'm the chapter chair of YPO Metro New York, and it is my absolute pleasure to introduce all of you to Dr. Omid Safi. Omid, welcome. How are you today?
Thank you. It's lovely to be with you and with all of your participants.
It's so great to have you here. And to remind everybody for the context with which we've gathered here today, we're going to be discussing Rumi in the 21st century and specifically focus on how we can all better navigate life challenges with love, justice, and tenderness. As you all know, our mission here as a community is to focus on how can we make the biggest positive impact on the world by learning how we can be better leaders, how we can navigate key trends, and how to bolster our well-being. And I believe that Omid is truly the ideal guide for us today to provide us with a perspective that has been powerful for centuries to all kinds of people, definitely myself included. So a little bit about Dr. Omid Safi. He is a renowned Duke University professor of Islamic studies. He is a nationally sought after speaker on the teachings of Muslim mystics or Sufis and the poet Rumi. He grew up in Iran and the American South. He's delivered the keynote for the annual Martin Luther King commemoration at the National Civil Rights Museum. And his work, his latest book is called Radical Love, Teachings from the Islamic Mystical Tradition. Before we dive into this conversation, I want everybody to take just a moment to deeply reflect on why you are here today. What is your intention? Why have you taken this hour to engage in this particular conversation? So please take a moment, think about that. Ideally, write it down just in a sentence or a bullet point. What is it that you want to get out of it, out of this conversation today? And I'd love for you to commit to that intention and really engage with this conversation, because I'm confident it will be life-changing for all of us if we can really crystallize, our key learnings from this and the action items that we can commit to from taking this. So excited to hear everybody's key intentions in the chat window in just a moment. And to get us kicked off, Omid, thank you again for being here. My first question to you, just to get us kicked off, is who was Rumi in your eyes? What was so unique about him? And why is it important for us leaders here in the 21st century to learn from his teachings? What's at stake here?
Thank you so much. And what a pleasure to get a chance to talk about one of my very favorite beings ever, the wonderful Persian poet Rumi, known in the West as Rumi, who might have been one of the greatest love mystics that this world has ever known, a supremely gifted storyteller, and a luminous sage. In this part of the world, what is today Iran and Turkey, there have been thousands and thousands of luminous beings, sages, mystics, whatever you wish to call them. But there's a reason that Rumi continues to speak with us and to us today, all these centuries later. I think he has the most extraordinary ability I've ever seen to see the sublime in the everyday. There's a way that in the barking of a donkey, in the cooking of a food, in the tender touch of a lover, that he can come to see all that is sacred and spiritual in a way that translates across time and space and traditions. And he does so with a gentleness, with a twinkle in his eye, with a fierce and what I've called radical love that speaks to people of all tradition. And so that's one reason why in our own age, as filled as it is with strife, with tension, with vitriol and bombast, there's only so much that we can do to curse the darkness. And I think we are so much better served to bring light into this world. And I think Rumi is an extraordinary channel for that.
Beautifully said, Omid. Thank you. I love the adjectives you used. You talked about gentle and fierce at the same time. spiritual, sacred, yet radical. And this call to action for us to all keep in mind, instead of, complaining about the darkness, how do we become vehicles of bringing more light into the world? And my hope is that this conversation helps us to reflect on how we can each better do that on our own, with our loved ones, our organizations, and our communities at large. So thank you again for being here. I want to ask you, so if you were to really, of the incredible amounts of works that Rumi has produced, when you really zoom out and reflect on like what are the critical key themes that he keeps coming back to help us see this, the sacredness and the immensity and the miracles all around us in everyday experience, what are those key themes that drive his thinking and his guidance on how we should best navigate our lives?
That's a wonderful question, and it has a one-word answer, and that answer is love. Love, more than anything else, is the theme that runs through almost all of Rumi's poetry, and yet he's insistent on the fact that this is something so much more grand and subtle than what we tend to think of. There's something ironic about when you listen to songs on the radio, or actually no one listens to songs on the radio anymore. When you download songs from iTunes or whatever, or watching a movie, it seems like, half of it is about love. And yet, if you really sit down with people when the doors are closed and you're just having those heart-to-heart conversations over a cup of tea, so many people tell you that they feel like they're living a loveless existence. So many people tell you that they've never found that great love that they were searching for. So what Rumi does is he starts with that concept of love, and he strives to make it something much more expansive, something much more generous. He tries to get us to zoom back from love. We've so often reduced love to a kind of romantic, physical, and even sexual kind of love. And so he reminds you that you're actually born in love. That if you're alive today, if you're taking a breath right now, it's because somebody got up in the middle of the night when you were a helpless baby, and they chose to put their breast in your mouth or give you a bottle. They chose to forego their own sleep and instead come and rock you to comfort or to change your diaper. So you've known love, you've been loved. And he urges you to begin by zooming back and asking this question of, have you ever known the love of a father, of a mother, of a grandparent? Yes, of a lover, of a friend, of a child, of a teacher, of a coworker. And then in that part that is particularly challenging nowadays, not just of a neighbor, but also of a stranger. And then here's the part where, as you picked up on it, those ideas of tenderness and fierceness come together in Rumi's teachings. He says that love is not just an emotion. It's not just passing thing where I love you today, but I may not love you tomorrow. For Rumi, operating in this sacred tradition, love is the very outpouring of God, of the Spirit, into this realm. And love has a movement. And this is the way Rumi puts it. He says, when love emerges out of you towards the public, we call it justice. So when we talk about wanting to establish a just society, a just working community, we're really talking about a place where love is present, where people are taken care of. We want to have a beloved community out in public, which is permeated by love. Today, we have a lot of conversations about justice and social justice. For Rumi, this is no different than wanting to have love out loud, love in the public. It's not just a private thing in your bedroom. But then, when that same love moves inward within you, That love he calls tenderness. So it's fascinating that in Rumi's tradition, the very people who are the most insistent on protecting those who are vulnerable in your communities or out in the world are the very same people who one-on-one are the most tender. I think we've confused that, and sometimes we come to think of the strongest people that we know as somehow being hard. But Rumi reminds you that the strongest of trees might be the ones who can bend a little bit, and then they can bounce back. That the stiffest of trees are going to be the ones to break in the storms of life.
It's beautiful. I mean, thank you so much. So my key takeaway from here is this justice and tenderness. So love outpouring, the impact we look to have, that's about justice and everybody feeling taken care of as a result of our actions. And tenderness is the love within you. And it's balancing those two forces or emphasizing those two forces. Having given us this kind of launching pad around Rumi's perspective on love, share with us, if you will, what have been the kind of perennial mistakes that we've been making in our societies, but also as individuals in today, but also back in Rumi's time and all the times in between. What are the constant stumbling blocks? Again, there's so many, too many to count. But if you were to narrow it down to the fewest aspects, you already mentioned one. We forget maybe that we were born in love, that yeah, like our perceptions about love might be kind of like too limited. What are these like key mistakes that we make so that we can all hold up a mirror to ourselves and really reflect on where we might be slipping up?
Well, let me mention two at least. And you you invited our friends who are joining us today to take a minute and to think about what has brought them to this gathering. I would invite us to think about what was your first response when you woke up this morning and you might have gone into a bathroom and seen your first glimpse of your own self this morning? My sense is that if we're being honest with ourselves, most of the time when we see ourselves for the first time, having just woken up, perhaps not at our finest and most put together, you might say something to yourself like, you look like piece of death warmed all over again, except in the South, it would have some more colorful language than that. Piece of doo-doo warmed over again. What is it that makes us see ourselves as that? Because if you went into your workspace and you came across every coworker and every colleague that you have, and you approached them and you said, you look like a piece of shit, warmed over again, you'd probably be sent into somebody's office for sensitivity training. So why do we speak to ourselves that way? Why is it that not only have we forgotten to see the sublime and the sacred and the beautiful in one another, but that we've also been veiled from seeing it in ourselves? I sometimes notice this. I spend a lot of time with children and a lot of time with university communities. Children, when they laugh with their whole being. They laugh so hard that tears start coming down from their face. But look at the way that adults have been taught to laugh. When something is really, really funny, we cover our own mouth. Like Rumi would say to us, who did this to you? Who made you be embarrassed about your own joy that you have to cover up the effervescence of your spirit? Can you go back and recover that part of you that was splendid, that was luminous, that was shining? And there is that sense that the more in touch we are with that in us, which is sublime and beautiful and subtle, the more we cultivate that fragrance, the more we're also able to see it in one another. Okay? That's, I think, one. And then the other important mistake or tendency that we have And this is partially a result of living in a society, people can call it what they want, a consumer society or whatever, where we so often measure our worth by our ability to produce something, right? And think about, even you and I might be at times guilty of this. If we have a conversation and we get 1,000 people tuning in, we're like, that was a great program. But we don't know the impact that it has. Maybe if we had one person, but that one person was completely present and taking everything to heart, then that would be a really efficacious conversation. So one of the things that Rumi always does is that he's encouraging us to strive for a life of balance. Balance between tangible, this worldly, and subtle, otherworldly, between care of the self and care of the all. And then the one that I've been thinking about a lot recently is the balance between activity, and this is one of my favorite words in the English language, repose. Activity and repose. I see that over your head, you have the images of the whirling dervishes sitting on a shelf. And, many of us have seen the beautiful, hauntingly sacred, meditative movement of the whirling dervishes. The dervishes always keep one foot on the ground. The left foot, because that's closest to the heart, and with the right foot, they're circling all around the world, right? This is a symbolic movement, a symbolic dance to teach us that we have to learn to balance being active and finding repose. My worry is that many of us, and particularly I'm guessing many of our audience members who are in leadership positions, that we have excelled in activity. We've become masters of productivity. I wonder how good we are at repose. I wonder how good we are at replenishing our hearts. One of the things that I find that Rumi's tradition has to offer us is that he encourages every person to examine their own heart, their own soul, their own spirit, and to ask that question, how do I replenish myself? What activities, what places, what people, what kinds of conversations? And then to return to them again and again and again until they become a habit. The way that I see this at work is, most of us carry one of these little satanic devices with us at all times. Before we've even gotten dressed in the morning, we reach for our phone. If the red light on battery on your smartphone comes on, right, most of us go into this kind of cosmic and existential state of panic that we have to recharge our phone because if the phone dies, I die. Well, do we know ourselves well enough? Do we know our hearts well enough to know, how's my heart doing? How's my body doing? If I'm running low, do I know into whose arms I have to return to? Do I know the activities and the teachings and the poems and the stories that rejuvenate me? And it might be the teachings of your ancestors. It might be the teachings of your mother and your grandmother, or it may not. It could also be that there's been a rupture and you have to discover your own method of nourishment. So this is one of the teachings that Rumi has. There's a wonderful story from him and his spiritual teacher in which people are simply trying to live through somebody else's experience. And his response is, why are you trying to walk with someone else's walking staff? Why are you riding into the field on this saddle that has no horse. Arise on your own 2 feet. Walk on your own 2 legs. Soar with your own 2 wings. So I think that sense of striving for work that is efficacious and repose and rest and rejuvenation, which is that much harder to do when the boundaries between work and home, activity and rest are so blurred. Because almost anywhere that we go, there's a laptop and there's a phone, and we can be dialing in and we can be answering email. And so it takes real intentionality to actually carve out time of our days and our weeks and to make that commitment to rejuvenating ourselves.
Beautifully said, Omid. Thank you so much. So much to reflect on there in what you said. Just my key takeaways, it's the importance of self-appreciation, because before we have that, it's very difficult for us to properly appreciate others and the world around us. And then this ongoing theme of balance between action and repose, between production and reflection, balancing all these forces and like reflecting deeply on, you know, how well we're doing that. And like you said, we all have to soar with our own 2 wings. So we need to figure out quite a lot of this on our own. But the good thing is, Rumi has made many suggestions extremely powerfully and poetically. So I'd love to switch gears now and really kind of dial us into how Rumi suggested we actually put these suggestions and guidance into practice. For example, how do we get out of bed in the morning, right? After a long day, the day before with a ton of work, we're still feeling pretty tired. We get up, we look at the mirror in the bathroom. What are, I mean, not just there, but throughout our lives, how do we create the self-appreciation and the appreciation that we should have for the world? How do we bring that to the forefront of our mind so that it's right in front of our eyes as opposed to somewhere deep down where we know it's true, but we don't really prioritize it? What did Rumi say we should do?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. So many of his teachings in this regard come back to the teaching of oneness or unity. And if I could take the liberty of reminding us where we are, you know, there's a wonderful teaching that you get in Rumi's tradition that says, have your heart be where your feet are. Have your heart be where your feet are. So let's just remember, you know, where we are, not only in this crucial moment in American history, we're also at a time where 209,000 people have lost their lives because of Corona. And it's a reminder that our lives are intertwined, that one person who is behaving in a way that is irresponsible can have an impact on everybody else. Now, Rumi didn't know about Corona, but he knew about the sense that the self and the all are deeply intertwined. That's part of the reason why, since our lives are interwoven and interconnected, whenever we do something kind towards somebody else, it also comes back to us. And his call for self-care is not simply one of carpe diem, right? It's not go on an endless shopping spree and check yourself into a 5-star spa, although that sounds pretty nice too, and just simply tend to physical pleasure. It's that sense of your life and other people are deeply interconnected. So do the good in a way that uplifts the all. So one of the ways that he talks about that in a context of our interpersonal relationships is the need to transform our senses. And I'll give you one of the stories that's in Rumi's masterpiece, the Masnavi. He tells a story of a famous ruler, a caliph, a king, who had heard the great love poems that were sung for the beautiful beloved Layla. By the way, this is where Eric Clapton got his Layla song from. There was a poet who had fallen in love with Layla named Majnun, meaning the love-crazed one. And Majnun wrote so many poems praising Layla's beauty. And some of these poems get to the king, and the king says, wow, any woman who would inspire poetry this beautiful would have to be someone that I would need to meet. And because he's the king, and it's good to be the king, he actually orders not just Layla, but all the women from her village to be brought to his court. And all day he's just tingling with excitement that he's gonna see this most beautiful woman ever. And they're brought to his court, and he walks into his court, and he's looking at the women, and he's hoping just to be able to pick out the one whose beauty surpasses them all. But he looks, and he looks, and he looks, and there's no real one of them that stands out. You know, my daughter, who's a college student, says, they're all basic. You know, plain Janes. And so he turns to his advisor and he's like, you brought Layla? Yeah, we brought Layla. He's like, wow, well, none of them match what's on paper. And so he finally addresses the women in front of him and goes, is one of you all Layla? And then Layla steps forward, looks just like all the other ones. And the king looks and goes, you? You are Layla? And in this tradition, you better watch out because the women talk back. And Layla says, I am Layla, but you are not Majnun. And then Rumi takes over and he says, in order to see the beauty of Layla, you have to train your eyes to look through the glance of Majnun. So one of the teachings that Rumi has is, what if we came to think of our body not as this suitcase, not as this thing that contains our thoughts and our emotions and even our spirit? What if our body is the steed, the horse, with which we ride towards the beloved? What if we were to train our eyes so that we look at one another with the glance of compassion? What if we were to train our ears so that we don't listen to needless chit-chat, but we listen to conversations that bring out the beauty of one another? Maybe the hardest of them all, how do we train the tongue? You know, I'm an academic, and when I go to academic conferences, the way that we measure someone being supremely intelligent, someone having an extraordinary quick wit, is if we can sit in a panel discussion and before the other person has even finished their presentation, I've taken their ideas, I've chopped it and sliced it and diced it, and I've thought of the perfect way to tear down their idea and to show them how smart I am. That's what we take in academia as a sign of intelligence. Rumi strives for something different. What if we trained our tongue so that before a single word comes out, we ask ourselves, is this true? Is it kind? And is it necessary? Is it true? Is it kind? And is it necessary? Do I need to say this statement in public? Is there a better way for me to say it privately? What if we came to train our touch? You know, we are living in this era of the Me Too movement and so many scandals that we see about sexual scandals and abuse of touch and abuse of intimacy, hierarchy and power, right? What if we could train our touch so that the only time that one would touch somebody else would be a touch that would be wanted and welcomed, and it would bring comfort, but never to grab or to possess. So in Rumi's teaching, there's the sense of retraining the body, retraining the senses, retraining the breath. You talked about what do we do practically, right? In Rumi's tradition, not only was there prayer in the morning, in the middle of the day, late at night, but there were also very specific meditation and breathing practices that he and his community engaged in. I find it extraordinarily helpful for people of whatever background and tradition that they're in. When you wake up in the morning, rather than the first thing you do is to grab the phone or jump into the shower and start your day, take a few minutes, take 5 or 10 minutes. If you have access to an outdoor space, sit outside. Welcome the breath into your body. One of the things you might notice is that you've gone for so long taking these short, shallow breaths, right? We breathe down to here and then we let it back out. No, let the breath in, feel your whole chest, let it fill your belly. And you will notice that as you take 4 and 5 and 10 of these breaths, that your breathing rate slows down, your heart rate slows down. And then return to that practice as often as you can during the course of the day. Sometimes you might be in a work situation when you have a difficult coworker, and they might be bombastic, they might be shouting, they might be raising their voice. Well, can we do something more than simply react to them? Can we do something more than simply return their vitriol to them? No, we must respond. But the response doesn't have to be just mirroring that kind of ugly behavior. So if you find yourself in a situation like that, pause, observe the breath coming in, filling your chest, filling your belly, coming back out. There's a wonderful story, and I'll stop after this. Rumi talks about one time walking on a path. In those days, all the roads were dirt roads. There were no paved roads. When it would rain, there would be lots of puddles here and there. And if someone had to carry something heavy, well, there would be a donkey or a horse carrying it with a cart. So, and then if the animals have to relieve themselves, there would be a bunch of poop or a puddle of urine. This is what I mean by he uses very earthy, everyday examples. So he says that he's walking and he sees a donkey has relieved itself and there's a puddle of piss in the middle of the road. And a piece of straw from a nearby field has come and it has landed in the middle of the puddle of piss. And there's this fly that was hovering around and it comes to land on the piece of straw. So Rumi stops and he's watching this fly on a straw, on a puddle of piss, and the wind kicks up and it starts carrying the piece of straw and with it, the fly. And he imagines the fly saying, I'm the king of this world. I'm the captain of this ship. Well, and then Rumi tells you, you yourself are the fly. You yourself are the straw. You yourself are the puddle of piss. You yourself are the wind. And you yourself are the person gently smiling at the fly, right? So let's say next time you are in a work situation, in a family dynamic, or heaven forbid, you turn on the news and you see an angry orange person shouting and yelling. Take a deep breath. We don't have to behave like them. You can take a deep breath. You can smile. You can say, this is not my puddle of piss. I don't need to get caught up in a fight over, is this puddle of piss mine or theirs? There's a whole big earth beyond it. Another way that sometimes people say it, not my circus, not my monkey. And we don't have to respond by saying, you are so rude and inconsiderate and disrespectful. No, we can step back, we can respond without reacting, we can set a higher example. And Rumi has enough confidence in our interpersonal interactions to say that beauty is its own witness, that people's hearts do respond to the good and the beautiful. That's a little challenging in our own contemporary time period because we live not just in the age of social media, but in the age of Twitter, in the age of instant response, in the age of hashtags and quick reactions. In that sense, I'm actually encouraging us to be extraordinarily countercultural. I'm talking about slow-cooked meals, conversations and friendships that take years to deepen and to ripen and to mature. I said I would hush, and I really am hushing now. He uses the analogy of fruit as they ripen. You know, if you look at a tree that is just standing straight up, Rumi says chances are it doesn't have a lot of succulent, ripe fruit to offer. But if on the other hand, it's an apple tree or a peach tree or a pomegranate tree, where the branches are pregnant with sweet and ripe, delicious fruit, the riper they are, the lower towards the ground the branches reach. And so in that sense, it's the most fruitful of trees that are sometimes the humblest. And I do sometimes worry that in our corporate culture, in our university culture, the way that we have modeled leadership tends to reward one type of leading, and it doesn't sufficiently reward people who lead through humility, through love, and through service. I do think we would benefit from some change in that direction.
Beautiful, Omid. Thank you. That was extraordinarily well put. Key takeaways from me is always remembering where we are, starting with that, our context, our feet on the ground. And then, I mean, the overarching thing is what you said at the beginning, doing the good in a way that uplifts all, and then retraining all of our senses and all of our abilities to ask the questions. You mentioned it in relation to the tongue, but I think it applies to all the senses, like, is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary? Can it be private? Should it be public? Asking, being thoughtful, having that gap between, I guess, the action, having a moment of reflection before the action, and using that moment of reflection to really think about how does the way we engage with this situation, opportunity, challenge, or whatever have you, how does that uplift all? How can we do it in the way that, yeah, creates the overall best outcome? And obviously responding in kind, mirroring the bad behavior of others definitely is not going to get us the results that we want. What I want to encourage everybody to do is, having heard everything that Omid was kind enough to share with us, what are the key questions in your head? What do you struggle with the most, or what do you see as the biggest opportunities? Any specifics, please type them into the Q&A box. And after just one quick question, one final quick question from me, we're going to turn our attention to the audience Q&A. Omid, I want to go back to what you said earlier. You mentioned, you know, kids, when they laugh with their whole heart. They've got tears rolling their face. And as adults, we still get that sometimes, but it's definitely far fewer occasions than we used to have. So tell us a little bit about Rumi's perspectives on this, not just in terms of laughter, but also just like giving the world everything that we have in a way where we don't cover our mouths, right? Where we don't hide, or we don't constantly hedge our bets. He's got incredible quotes around, you know, set your life on fire, become notorious. I mean, these are not what somebody might necessarily expect from a spiritual guide, right? But Rumi has a way of a very powerful call to action to engage fully as well, not just reframe, but engage. Share with us the key lessons there, what we should keep in mind, and any practical ways in which we can remind ourselves to live more fully day to day.
Yeah, thank you so much for that invitation. There's a beautiful reminder that Rumi has, and this goes back to that notion of balance. The fact that so much of the work that we do is to look for a tangible product that we can quantify. And he certainly did plenty of action. He wrote 60,000 lines of poetry. He taught as a professor. He had all these mentoring relationships. So it wasn't as if he was just sitting in a corner morning, noon, and night in meditation. He had that balance between activity and repose, action and meditation. But one of the things that he calls us to is to remember that to work on one's own heart can be efficacious in terms of what we do in the world. And the way that he puts this is through this very simple poem that I'll read it for you. He says, wherever you are, be right there, fully present. Wherever you are, be the soul of that place. Wherever you are, sanctify that place with your whole being. And I do think about that notion of sanctifying the places that we're at. You know, we have such a culture of multitasking. This is something that I sometimes have to speak with my own mentees and students. We almost take pride of the fact that we can be in a meeting and we can text somebody and we can put together a grocery list, and as if the more things we can juggle, the more capable we are. And we almost don't even have the vocabulary for the corollary, not just a kind of single-mindedness, but single-heartedness. What would it mean when we're in a conversation with someone, right? This is one of the things that in Rumi's tradition, they narrate about the Prophet Muhammad. That whenever he would talk to someone, he wouldn't just be like looking and then turning his head and talking to you. He would actually turn so that his shoulders were facing your shoulders, his eyes were locked into your eyes. And in that moment, you would be sanctifying the place with your own presence. This is something that people said about Rumi, that when they would speak with him, he made them feel like the most important person, the only person in the whole world at that time. So I think there is a way in which, and I think this is one reason why so many of us have projects, beautiful, grand projects that we launch, but we don't ever get to bring them to fruition. Maybe at least one part of it is that we're launching 5 different projects at the same time. I think I counted at one point when I was a precocious young academic, I was writing 18 books at the same time, because every single one of them seemed interesting to me. And then it took a lot of discipline to say, no, I'm going to be wholeheartedly present with this one project to make sure that it has a sweetness and a ripening and my full attention, to bring it out, to take pleasure in it, to offer it as a service to humanity, and then to step back, to repose, to recharge, and then to move on to the next task. I think these are some of the ways that some of his teachings can help us. There's something also about the workplace culture where we're almost obsessed with talking about success. I sometimes joke that when you listen to the CEOs of our university, and universities today are in fact, for-profit businesses. You can almost, if people still know what the game bingo is, you can almost play bingo every time you hear them utter the three magic words: success, leadership, excellence. Success, leadership, excellence. Well, pray tell, how are we supposed to create a culture of leadership when every single person is a leader? That's doomed to fail. What we should actually be helping to cultivate is a harmonious community. Yes, in which some people are leading and other people are fulfilling their best role. And so there's that balance again between leadership and followership. Success is lovely. It's lovely when something that you do comes to fruition and you get to see its results and its fruits. Many of us also fail. We fail again and again and again in our personal lives, in our workplace. And Rumi has this exquisite poem that Leonard Cohen loved so much. And Rumi says at one point, "The wound is where the light enters you." The wound is where the light enters you. Leonard Cohen took it as there's a crack in everything. That's where the light gets in. Cohen considered Rumi the greatest mystical poet that the world has ever known. So I think to have a sense in which we come to see our own life journey, the work that we do in leadership, in our corporations, in our communities, as not only having mountaintops, but also valley bottoms. And that whatever term you want to put to it, teachings, sages, God, the sacred, the spirit, that the God of the mountaintop is also the God of the valley bottom, right? Any teacher who says, "Follow me and my path and you will know nothing but success," right? That's a used car salesman. That's a charlatan. No one on this earth has endless success. I think to me, a real teacher, a real leader is the one who's actually teaching gratitude and buoyancy, so that when you fall flat on your face with absolute failure, you have enough resources and you know whose hands to reach out to be able to get back on your feet and to start walking again.
Beautiful, Omid. Thank you so much. This was truly wonderful. We have some amazing audience questions. We're going to dive into them in a few seconds. Before we do, everybody who's here, everybody who just got to this incredible privilege to be guided by Omid and these thoughts from Rumi, I would like everybody to just think about, like, what is your key learning here, but not just at a big level, but what's your key learning as it relates to one thing you could endeavor to do differently starting today, starting later today, and taking it on to where we're at this month and beyond. For me, just to share, as you were speaking, Omid, I was thinking a lot about like what I'm like when I'm traveling and, you know, visiting like really important landmarks and how much attention I pay to every detail and learning. I was also thinking about in a job interview or a really important business meeting, how like I am on and I'm sensing everything and I'm just like fully there. And how before it, I don't do anything else. And after it, I let myself relax. I want to bring that part of myself, that more aware, more intentional, fully present, shoulders facing in the right direction. So that's my key action item. And I hope everybody can come up with their own one. And I would welcome you actually, if you're thinking of it, sometimes it helps to crystallize it. Feel free to put it in the chat window as a tool for galvanizing others as well as yourself to carry this through. So with that being said, Omid, I'm going to dive in here to the amazing questions coming in. Let's do just 1 minute per question, even though all of them deserve a lot more time. So the first question is as follows. It's from an anonymous attendee who says, with social media, 24-hour news cycles, and COVID-19 related challenges, Our team members are more stressed and vulnerable than ever before. How can leaders encourage their teams to disconnect and engage in meaningful self-care? You mentioned meditation and breathing exercises. Any other practical suggestions?
Yeah, thank you for that. So I think I would suggest a couple. One of them is that practice that we mentioned in passing, which is to create spaces where you encourage the folks in your community to think about what it is that rejuvenates their heart and their body and their soul. They don't necessarily have to share it with you, but to encourage them to explore that, and then to be mindful of the fact that maybe what rejuvenated your soul when you're 20 is not the same thing that rejuvenates you when you're 30 or 50 or 70. To be generous enough with yourself to allow for new insights to come. The other thing, and this is moving from a culture of individualism and measuring success at an individual level to thinking of well-being at a communal level, right? That I cannot do well unless in some ways we're all doing okay. So I remember that some years ago when I was going through a particularly challenging period, I had a very dear friend of mine who came up to me and just said to me, I just want you to know that I'm in your boat. And I was like, I don't know. What do you mean by your boat? And she just says, I'm in your boat. You're going through a turbulent storm. And if your boat goes up on a wave, I'm coming with you. And if your boat comes crashing down, I'm with you. And one of the things that I realized is that when a lot of things in life are going well, it's easy to have lots of cheerleaders, to have a lot of yes people kind of around you, right? But when your boat comes crashing down, who is truly in your boat? Who are the people that you don't even have to turn around and see if they're still there? But all you have to do is to extend your hand and you know that they're going to grab it. There's going to be somebody faithful, devoted, grabbing your hand. So I always encourage people to think about two related questions. Who is in your boat? Who are the people that if life came crashing down on you, that you could reach out to? And just as importantly, in whose boat are you? To be mindful and aware of those relationships and to return to them. So often we take those relationships for granted until it's too late. I think for me personally, one of the ways that being a leader, being a mentor is most meaningful is to make sure that the people who depend on me and on my leadership know that I'm in their boat. That yes, I want to see them do their best. Yes, I want to see them bring the projects that we are launching together to a sweetness and a ripening and a fruition. And I'm also committed to their well-being and their well-doing. That if they hit a crisis, all they have to do is just extend a hand and I'll be there with them and for them to grab it. I think that's one other service that practice that people could put into their life.
Beautifully said. I mean, thank you so much. Definitely going to be thinking about the boat analogy on my side, both whose boat I'm on and who's on mine, and yeah, how do I build on that? Thank you. So next question is from Fawaz Idrisi, who says, with tough times as leaders, we all took tough decisions of pay cuts and letting go of people, which I feel makes our feelings more tough, almost heartless. How can you have this emotional balance and get back some of our good feelings?
That's a wonderful question, and it's most real good questions don't have an easy answer or an easy answer that fits into a couple of minutes. You know, sometimes I encourage us to have a sense of attentiveness to our being. Think about our beings are not static. They're always in a state of flux. I might have had a cup of coffee this morning, and without being too graphic about it, the same water that went into my coffee yesterday was flowing in a pipe, and maybe 2 weeks before that was flowing down a river. And in a few hours, it will no longer be in my body. It will have moved on to the next destination. The same thing with the food that I would eat. Yesterday, it might have been a lettuce growing somewhere, or it might have been a part of an animal, or wheat growing somewhere. And in a week or so, it will be somewhere on Earth again. So we see that our bodies are in this constant state of flux. Every cell in our body is replenished periodically. And to view our heart in that same way. I heard the questioner use the word heartless, right? Well, it's true that if we see giving as something that we have a finite reservoir and we give it to other people, then at some point we're going to be empty ourselves. I'm encouraging us to approach life and being and reality differently, where we live in these cultures of perpetual replenishment, of rejuvenating the heart. You would probably not go for more than 12 hours without eating something. Observe your heart in that way so that you bring joy and tenderness and love to your heart that way, and to create opportunities for the people around you. That way we would never have to be depleted and heartless. And the good news is the opportunity to do so is always around. And you don't have to read Rumi, though he's great. Rumi comes from a Muslim background. You can find these mystical teachings in any tradition. And what's amazing is that the more sensitive you are to them, the more you come to detect the fragrance. Rabbi Heschel, who is in some ways Rumi's counterpart from the Jewish tradition, he talked about the goal of life is to live in radical amazement. That wide open sense of wonder that children have. And it says all that you need to live in radical amazement are three things: God, a soul, and a moment. And he said all three are possible in every breath.
Wow, that's so beautiful. Omid, thank you. In the last minute or so, a couple minutes we have left, I would love to ask you, how can our community best support you and your endeavors? How can we best engage with your work? What are your key recommended resources? There's a few questions around books or courses, like how can people engage more with this and best support you in the process? And finally, if you have a final call to action or a word of wisdom for us to wrap this up, that would be very welcomed as well.
Thank you. You know, I think that the greatest way that people can support this work is to work on their own hearts and souls. We've got 77, I think, participants now, maybe some more people watching it later. To have 77 people moving through the world with kindness, and gentleness, and love, that would be the greatest gift to me or to anybody. Here we have an hour, and I do have some of these online courses, which are video-based. They're at illuminatedcourses.com. And we have a course on Rumi, we have a course on the teachings of Dr. King, and there'll be other ones coming as well. The Rumi course could be very helpful for friends to turn into. So have a look at it. If you enjoy it, share it. Share the link with other friends as well. It's just at www.illuminatedcourses.com. And let me leave you with one last final teaching or saying, and may this also be of service to you. This, like the story of the fly on the puddle of piss, this is one that I myself try to return to, and I find that it has an extraordinary effect. In answering some of the questions that came up in your Q&A comments that I read, no, if you see somebody who is abusing others, right, who is taking advantage of their authority, yes, that might be a time to stand up and protect those who are vulnerable. But many situations in life don't rise quite to that level. You might be dealing with a partner or with a coworker, and you see them do something, and your first response is to say, how on earth could you do that? Right? How in the name of God could you leave the dishes right here? How could you have sent out that email with that typo in it? How on earth could you have possibly prepared a presentation that poorly? Whenever you find yourself wanting to have that response, do take a breath. Right? It's good to insist on excellence. It's good to insist on people achieving their full potential and mentoring them so that they do. But very few people respond well to being attacked. Very few people. So perhaps a more efficacious way when you have that thought is to ask the question, well, how could you have done this? If I can rise above my own vantage point that I look at the world and look at life from your point of view, what might have been going on in your life that led you to leave the dishes right there? What else maybe were you juggling in terms of work or family obligations or health or just the stress of living in this world that led you to not having proofread that email or having done a presentation in a way that was not sublime? Let me ask you about what else was leading you. And maybe that's a way of showing care and compassion for somebody else rather than just leading with, how on earth could you, right? And to have that sense of curiosity that I don't know everything. I don't even know everything about my own partner. And I surely don't know everything about my coworkers. How could you share with me? And how can we create an environment in which you and I and all of us achieve our full potential because we're in this together? And like that boat analogy, either we go up together or we come down together, but we're in this together.
So beautifully said, Omid. I think that's a totally life-changing lesson for those who make the efforts to implement it. And you've certainly given us incredible guidance. I know that so many of these lessons you drew on from Rumi and other wise people who've said this really well. But I want to recognize the fact that, you know, a lot of these thoughts, the way you channel them is truly extraordinary. And we were so fortunate to get to learn from you. And I know that we'll not only take these lessons for our lives, but we'll be sharing them with our friends, families, colleagues, and coworkers. So thank you for sparking the light within us, and really hope to see you again very soon.
It would be a pleasure, and I wish all the friends who are gathered here well. I hope that your lives are filled with joy and with wonder and with awe, and that you find whatever means of replenishing your hearts and souls. May you be well and may you be at peace.
Thank you, Omid, so much. Really appreciate it. All the best to you. See you again very soon. And thank you, everybody, for joining us. Take care. See you all soon. Bye.